is Fatima and welcome to today's TREA How To Workshop series on local food. Our discussion today will focus on how to use a basic canning method, a kitchen tool in which you can borrow from the London Library of Things hosted through Reimagine Co. Now we'll hear from Pamela Reid, who offers us a wealth of information given her extensive experiences of growing and processing of local food. Welcome, Pam.
Welcome to my kitchen. Today we're going to be speaking about the canner and the canning supplies that are available, as Fatima said, the Library of Things. And it's a great tool to have in the kitchen and to get more practice with as you move along, because it is a great opportunity to preserve your own food and to take advantage of foods when they come in season to fill in your own pantry. So today, we're going to make a basic tomato sauce. We are going to be using some canned tomatoes, some stewed tomatoes. However, you can certainly buy a bushel of tomatoes, the tomatoes of which there are many ways of processing to put in glass bottles. So this is just the method of properly preparing food and to put it into a glass jar and then to eventually put a seal on to properly process it with heat, and then to label them, and then to put them away for when you're ready to enjoy them. So this is a really great ritual every year that I do. I have been canning for a number of years, and I started with stewed tomatoes, tomato sauce, a marinara sauce, salsa. So tomatoes are one of the easiest things to process because it is a very high acid food. So I do encourage everyone to learn more. Bernardin, which is one of the larger companies, as well as Bell. This is the kit that is included with the canning set at the Library of Things. But Bernardin online has an incredible wealth of knowledge and resources, as well as the public library and other online resources to find best practices, as well as I really enjoy canning as a community activity. It's something that I really enjoy inviting people over to share in the work, because certainly many hands make light work. So if you're actually processing 2 or 3 bushels of tomatoes, having multiple people to do steps along the way to process. And then in my pantry, I have at this time, I have 24 bottles. So I figured about 2 or 3 bottles a month, and that will carry me through until spring. So, and then I can certainly look at what is available in my own gardens. I do grow extensive tomatoes, onions, herbs, and things to spice and flavor my own recipes. So I did go out today to give you a closer look. So I did pick parsley, some green onions, some fresh thyme, some fresh sage, some chives, and some fresh oregano. I think I have eaten all of the fresh celery, so I do have a package of celery, common celery, available from the grocery store. And I do like a variety of onions, so a nice Spanish onion, a red onion, but really your onion of choice. And of course, no spaghetti sauce is complete without garlic, in my opinion, but there are hundreds and hundreds of recipes that you can explore. Some people swear by rosemary, other people add a little bit of wine. There's so many options available. So the kit that is available in Lending Library, there's an instruction booklet. They have switched over from a metal. This would be the common one that most people would see. It's a little bit difficult to see, but it is a bit of a metal cage that would sit inside the canner to hold the bottles off the bottom of the pan, because it is a boiling water. Now they have switched to silicone mat that you can put in the bottom of the pot. And there is other supplies needed. So there's a funnel for properly pouring your sauce and ingredients into the jars. This is a great tool for lowering your glass jars into the boiling water and then retrieving them out during the sterilization process. And this kit comes with a very nice tool for removing air bubbles in the sauce or whatever you're packing in, so that way there is no air in the jar. And then there's a little step which kind of gives you a little bit of a visual to see how much headspace you need. So you're not going to fill the jars completely full. You're going to leave a little bit of space inside for processing. And this kit does come with jars and the lids. So we can speak a little bit about these. There's two separate things. So you can buy these sealing lids. They are a one-time use lid. There's a layer of rubber, and this will create an airtight seal, which is food safe when properly processed, and a metal ring, which holds the lid on. And of course, these jars do come in a variety of sizes. There's from 250 mils all the way up to very large mason jars. I prefer a smaller jar because I'm more likely to use it all at one time, and I'm less likely to use a part of a jar and put it in the fridge for later. But it really depends on the size of your family and how much cooking you do at one time. So this much spaghetti sauce would be great for 1 or 2 people. But if you are cooking for a larger crowd on a regular basis, going with a larger mason jar that is 1 liter quart, an option as well. So when I start to can, I do expect the work to be several hours. So giving myself enough time and to process, from processing the food to preparing the jars, to sterilizing the jars, to filling them, and then properly putting them in the water bath for a set amount of time. And each kind of filling requires a different time. And it depends on the size of the jar. So you can find more information on that on the Bernardin website, certainly online at several reputable sources. Many books available in the London Public Library on canning food safe measures so that you are going to ensure a healthy product that's not going to make you sick, because there is some concerns regarding improper processing that could lead to things like salmonella. So learning a little bit more about that. But yeah, today we're going to make tomato sauce. So I do get a lot of things ready. A good heat-proof pair of oven mitts, so that will protect my hands, and a cutting board, a knife, peelers, all of the tools. So I'm not going to be walking away from the stove or leaving any of this unattended. Certainly in your home, small children, pets, I would be mindful of, because there is a large pot of boiling water and more things that are of concern to small children or animals. So I would be mindful of that. So at this point, and get started. We're going to make the sauce. This is a great recipe. So I'm going to open up the cans of tomatoes. Now this year I made 1 bushel of tomatoes per batch, and I would blanch the tomatoes to get the skins off, and then I added them to the pot with sauteing onions and garlic. But there's a lot of options. I've added mushrooms, zucchini. I've done grated carrots. Carrots add a nice sweetness to a spaghetti sauce. As I mentioned before, there are a great many recipes, and it allows you to control how much salt. There's no preservatives. There's nothing unwanted in your own canning. I always think it makes a wonderful gift to share at special times of the year, something that you've made yourself, certainly. So I'm going to get started. So I do like to, and this is all personal preference. Some people like to put everything in at once, and some people like to add onions and celery first to sweat them down and bring out their flavors and sugars. I do have my composter, so my compost bucket there, I leave that readily available. I have friends who toss everything in their blenders and their food processors for speed. But other friends I know enjoy a good hand chop. I'm going to turn my stove on to medium. At this time, I am going to grab some olive oil. Pour a little olive oil in the bottom of the pot to start the sauteing. And I do use a wooden spoon. Give everything a nice stir. So I will grab the cans of sauce and slowly pour them in. I'll turn the temperature up a little bit on the pot. I do wash out my cans with a little bit of water to get all of the tomato out. And certainly the larger quantity that you're going to do to make canning worthwhile, a much larger pot. I prefer to use a large stainless steel pot, something with a nice thick bottom. You definitely need to watch the temperature, because if it gets too hot, the tomato sauce will start to burn, and that burn flavor does permeate all the sauce. So really watching your temperature so that your sauce does not burn. And continuously stirring, never walking away. As in all kitchen safety, having a pot lid on hand, so in the event that anything were to catch fire, that you can easily put a lid on top and smother the fire. Just basic kitchen safety when cooking at the stove. All my jars will go into the recycle. The stories that I grew up with is that processing would begin in the morning, because when tomatoes in the garden start producing, they start coming. We need to respond to capture them at their peak of freshness. So you could have a large quantity of tomatoes all at once. And I did go this year out to the local markets, and I did buy a large bushel of Roma tomatoes. So I was able to process an entire bushel. So from start to finish, that is about 4 hours, approximately. Depends on how fast you work. I put on some good music. I listen to podcasts. There's lots of things that I can do to make it enjoyable. And certainly having good friends or family around as we're doing it makes it so much more fun. So a lot of our stories we carry with us come from our families and the stories that are told during this time of food processing. So I'm going to wash out my jar. You can to add a little bit more. Very good. And to give that a nice stir. But as spaghetti sauce does start to bubble, you can get some splatter. So I don't think it's unheard of to have a bit of a messy kitchen as we're processing tomatoes. And certainly I believe I'm wearing a nice apron to keep yourself clean. So a couple things that we can speak to while we're waiting for the sauce to come to a bit of a bubble. I am going to drop the silicone canning into the bottom prior to starting, because it does take a long time to bring this size of container up to a boil. I did fill it up with water, and I'm going to drop that in the bottom. So this is a classic black enamel pot. They come in a couple different styles. So it is something that if you borrow from the lending library, and it's an activity that you really like and you would like to incorporate it into regular food processing, they do come up in the secondary market often. The Kijiji marketplace, etc., even yard sales, people are always passing these along. So purchasing new is not necessary, as is all the other cooking. I found a great many pots and pans and things to use in the kitchen at thrift stores. So while we're waiting for the sauce to come to a nice bubble, I will start to add some herbs and some spices here. So I have some fresh cracked pepper. And again, this is all personal preference. Nor does the salt and pepper have to be perfect, because when you do go get the jar off the shelf to make a recipe, you can certainly add more salt and pepper at that time. I do stand by the old saying, it's easier to add more than it is to take away. And I do enjoy pink Himalayan salt, but any kind of salt is sufficient. So it depends on how salty. I'm giving that a stir, but I am aware of watching how much sauce is in the bottom and making sure that I am stirring it around so I'm not going to burn it. Because it is so easy to do, and I have burnt sauce in the past and it's tragic. So the lessons that I've learned, I would like to be able to share with others. So I will grab the herbs from the cutting board, and I do put them in whole. This is oregano and thyme. And I do have a jar of dried basil that I process and save from my own gardens. But again, any dried herbs from the grocery store or the market, I'm going to give that a nice stir in. I do have bay leaves, so these are your very common, and I do go for a larger leaf because before we bottle them, we are going to remove the bay leaf. So having a larger leaf in the sauce will make it easier to find. Some people do use a bouquet garni, very fancy word for a bundle of herbs. And I have used a variety of things from like a little cheesecloth bundle to a tea ball. So there's lots of ways to be creative using what you have in the kitchen. So on the back of my stove here, I do have jars of basil from my garden, fresh or dried. It's great. And again, I don't think you can add too much basil. I have added pesto before. If you have an open jar of pesto in the fridge and you would like to use it up, you can certainly stir in some pesto. All good. Give it a stir. Some fresh rosemary. Again, really dry. Crumble it up. I don't think there's a wrong way. You can just dump it in, and that will be delicious. If I was using fresh tomatoes at this point, I would have another pot on the stove of boiling water. I would be taking the tomatoes, you cross them, you put a little cut in the top and the bottom, and then you drop them into the boiling water for a couple of minutes. The boiling water helps lift and loosen the skins. I then can scoop them up into a bowl of cold water or directly over to the kitchen sink. Sometimes I add ice, and then cold water bath causes the skins to slip off, just like peaches and other soft skin fruits. So at this point, garlic, onions, some celery. I could add some grated zucchini. You can really make a nice primavera sauce, so just chunky vegetable. I have in the past added finely diced eggplant, leeks. Anything is possible. So I'm going to take the cutting board back to the chopping station. These are my green onions from the garden. This is a common, I believe they're called an Egyptian walking onion, a very easy to grow. I've grown them in planters, in buckets, and in flower gardens. So they're a very hardy. I have gone out in late November and they're one of the first things to actually grow in the garden in March. So I enjoy a fresh green onion. Now I'm going to take the green onions and I'm going to add them into the sauce. We'll constantly stirring the sauce to ensure it doesn't burn. So as I mentioned before, I started canning watching the people in my family can. There'd be a job for everyone. Someone would be peeling, washing out the jars, chopping something. It was a collective activity. And I think that something that a lot of people are starting to revisit and revive, certainly. So having the equipment in the house, I think, is a beneficial investment. So borrowing it from the Library of Things, you will give you a good opportunity to find out if this is something that you would like to pursue. So I do like making sauces, chutneys. I have bottled, things like peaches and jams, jellies. There's a lot of things to get started with. So I started off making a stewed tomato and then a tomato sauce and then a salsa. So, and then my confidence grew. So I didn't feel like didn't know what I was doing, or picking up the phone and calling somebody and asking somebody last minute questions. So certainly going out to the store, there's a lot of stores in London that do sell the supplies that you will need. The snap lids are readily be found at grocery stores, Canadian Tire, Home Hardware. I've even seen them in dollar stores. So a pack of 12 will run anywhere from $1.50 to $4, depending on the size. They do come in a couple different sizes to fit the proper jars. And the lids as well, you can buy them separate. It is something that should be kept clean and dry. If you do start to see a rust on the lid, then I no longer use them. I do put them in the recycle, so they should look smooth inside. It's about not having anything that would prevent things from giving the jar a firm seal. So I will mention there's about half the canners will say leave the lids on after they're processed on your pantry shelf, and other 50% of canners will say you can remove the lid, and they store them in a bag or a loop. I use an old coat hanger, and I can fill the coat hanger with all of my rings. It's entirely a personal preference. Some people, arguments on both sides. So I suppose it's whatever you've grown up with and the people in your family who will say what they like best, and then you usually continue the tradition. So when I start getting ready for canning, there's a couple of things that I will start by doing. So I will make sure that my jars are clean. The glass jars should have no nicks. I mean, certainly if you're buying a brand new case, they'll be clean. I will still wash them hot soapy water in the sink or through a dishwasher. No residue of soap. And the surfaces should have no nicks or dings out of the glass. So it should be a nice solid glass. And so what I would do is I will drop them into the pot of boiling water, because at this point you will need to sterilize them. So making sure that the insides are completely clean, no debris, no bacteria, germs, or anything. So you're going to put your food into a sterilized jar. So many of the kits that you do see, you can pick these up at a lot of the home stores. I've seen these in Canadian Tire, Home Hardware, etc. So they'll come with the full kit. And then there's another really interesting little tool, because I like to drop, and again, of course, there's a couple different methods for this, but I still use, this is a little magnet on the end. And while I'm filling the jars with the sauce, I will dip each one of these lids into the canning, into the boiling water, and the boiling water helps soften that rubber seal around the outside. So don't leave them in for very long, less than a minute, and then using the little magnetic tool to reach in and grab the lid. So at that point I would bring it up, and we'll go over all of that at the time. So little tips that I've discovered along the way when it comes to canning time. I do keep all of this equipment in my storage all together. So there's been so many times when it comes to canning season and I'm searching all over the kitchen for one particular tool because I didn't put it back in the correct place it should go. So by keeping all of your equipment together in one place, it certainly makes canning a lot more fun. So I'm going to give the sauce a stir. We're just waiting at this point. I have to bring it to a bubble. While we are waiting for that to cook, I'm going to remove the lid. I'm going to drop in some glass bottles to start the sterilization process. I usually leave my jars in for at least 15 minutes. There's no harm in leaving the jars in longer. I do make sure that they don't bang or touch each other as they're going in, because we are going to be putting a cooler glass jar into boiling water. So it's something to be aware of. Everyone does have a story of a glass jar breaking, and it does happen, but we can take steps to avoid it. So this is the canning tool. So this will easily grab onto the jar, firmly squeeze it, and you have the glass jar. It's very firm, snug, and I slowly lower it into the pot to start to heat up. So then I would replace the lid. I've had this canning pot for 25 years now. So it's certainly a piece of equipment that has longevity, treated well, kept dry, properly stored. It is a good investment. So now there has been years where I've been fortunate to, have gotten a bushel of peaches or strawberries in season. So I will certainly go out and buy 2 or 3 flats of strawberries when they're ready and peak flavor. It's a really great hobby. There's nothing like opening up a jar in the middle of winter to taste a little bit of summer. As I mentioned before, I had just popped out to the garden and I picked a nice handful of fresh parsley. This is a flat leaf Italian parsley. A curly parsley would just fine. And I have chopped it up, diced it up really fine. And I add this, usually one of the last things that I add, so I'm not over cooking it, but it's fine enough to add a nice color to the sauce. Everything that you are going to use for this processing of putting the tomato sauce into the jars, everything should be sterilized. I'm going to make sure that there's nothing that could be on any of the inside, will touch the inside of the jars of food, so that we're not going to possibly introduce any pathogen, bacteria, or anything that could make us sick or spoil our food. I can speak briefly a little bit about labeling. I use a variety of different methods. I have used just basic masking tape with Sharpie marker, and I will write tomato sauce, the year, the month, used by. I think the recommended for most home preserved things is no more than a year. So using it within the 6 months to a year. I do have stories of opening up, finding a jar on my shelf that's a couple years old and it's still being acceptable, but the guidelines are is to eat it within the year. So putting a label on the jar, so you can write directly on this with a Sharpie marker. You can buy very fancy stickers. You can put an elastic band. There's all kinds of things you can do to properly label. You can go as far as to include the ingredients if you're going to gift it to someone. One of the things that I do when it comes to bottling things that involve tomatoes or anything of a bright color, I have quite a few dishcloths and things that are dedicated for just food processing. So stained tea towels, dishcloths, aprons. So by keeping all of that together in with the pot, so I'm not staining or spoiling anything new. So it's a great way to use up old rags.
I think the first time I did this, I did it with my mom, and she would tell me all the stories of her mother and people in her life who have been wonderful canners and filling the cupboards. So she grew up with going downstairs in the pantry and seeing shelves of vegetables, processed pickles, so beets, onions, cucumbers, all pickled, and then all the tomato sauces and all the jams. So more and more people, I think, are interested in doing that a little bit more. There's certainly a range of people who do a little, and then some people who are doing the math and calculating how much food that they would need for 6 months to be a little more self-sufficient and control what food that they are eating. As we mentioned before, that a lot of these sauces and things that you buy in the grocery store often have too much sugar, too much salt, additives, preservatives that you may not want and would like to leave out of your diet. So by doing it yourself, you can have ultimate control over what you are eating. One of the things that I do at this point is that I will turn the burner down because I won't possibly be paying as close attention to making sure that it's not burning. So I will turn this down to about a 1. My stove goes from a 1 to 9, so I'm going to leave it at between a 1 and a 2. So it is going to keep it hot enough, but it's not going to burn. Because as I start to spoon the sauce out into the jars, the volume in the pot is actually going to go down, and I don't want to lose or ruin my work. Very good. So at this point, I will start to move to my equipment and my tools. I will put on an oven mitt. You have to open the lid away from your face, so you're not going to get a splash of steam up in your face. I'm going to put the lid over on the chopping block, and I am going to put in all of the other equipment. With this tool, rubber side down, I'm going to reach in and I'm going to grab one of the glass jars firmly, and then I tip it and pour out any excess water. So I have one sterilized jar. So it's going to be extremely hot. I don't touch it at all. Sure you're able to fully see me, what I'm doing here. Making sure that there's no drips, spills, anything on the top rim of the glass jar. So at this point, I would come in for one of the lids attached. I would place it directly on, like so. And then, like I mentioned, I do a little dip, sterilize, sanitize everything. And now at this point, you can use those rubber grips, the cloth. It depends on your sensitivity in your hand, how much heat you can actually take. So a nice firm, and then I turn back quarter turn. So it's not super tight. So it's not, it should be just on. So we're about halfway there. So I will continue to fill the jars. If you do overfill the jar, I would use a sterilized metal spoon, a small teaspoon, to spoon some out and put it back in the pot, sterilizing the spoon, making sure there's nothing on the outside of the jar, making sure there's no bubbles inside. I'm making sure that I don't have a lot of spaghetti sauce on the tools that I'm putting back into the water so that the water doesn't become a soup, but there's a small amount, which I have found has never bothered canning. So yeah, there are some rules and guidelines for good, safe food handling, things that you can't water bath, things that you can, things that are lower risk. So as your skill level develops, all right, we are done. I'm going to leave the remaining sauce there on low simmering. So we need to make sure that this is at a full rolling boil, putting the jars back into the water bath. So the water bath, the point of it is it's going to bring the internal temperature up and to kill any other pathogen. And by creating a heat on the inside, it actually draws the lid down and it creates a food safe seal. So many people may be familiar with the rack. This was a commonly used. It does fit directly on top of the pot. You can put your glass jar directly into that and lower the rack into the pan. However, with this silicone one, that's not necessary. So using the same tool, I lift up each jar and I will slowly lower it in, putting it on the mat, leaving enough space in between each of the jars so they're not touching each other. So we need to bring the pot back to a rolling boil. So once the lid is on and the pot begins to fully boil again, I will set the timer. So I have looked up online in the Bernardin Canning website. So jars this size need approximately 18 to 22 minutes to process. So I will continuously check when it's in a full boil, and then I will set my timer for approximately 18 to 22 minutes. I'll see you in a few minutes. I see that we do have a nice full rolling boil now. I'm going to take one quick last look. We've got some nice bubbles rising to the surface. So I'm going to set the timer for 18 minutes and go sit down and have a cup of tea. Welcome back, everyone. We have now waited about the 18 minutes. The timer has gone off, and I'm going to grab our tools. I'm going to put on an oven mitt. Good. You can see. Nice bubble. I'm going to reach in one by one. I'm going to slowly lift out jars and place them onto a towel. I have a nice thick tea towel here on the kitchen counter, and leaving enough space in between the jars so that they can cool. So what we're going to be looking for right now is the pop, which is the sign that the seal has pulled down and has sealed. Oh, there's the first one. So as these cool down, and this can take overnight, I would leave these on the counter someplace safe overnight. And then once they're completely cool, at this point, I do like to tighten the ring and make sure that it's firm. Other people do the opposite, that once the seal has popped down, they will remove the ring and make sure that they're completely dry and store them separately. And then you would proceed to label your jars. And then once everything's nice and cool, you would take it to a pantry or wherever you store your food for future use. So that is pretty much an intro to making a tomato sauce, from either a blanched tomato to a jar or a canned tomato to then make your own spaghetti sauce and into the jar. So it's a fun activity to do. It's very satisfying. There's nothing like over the winter really whenever you would like to open it up and to use it. The price point is, I would say it's comparable. It depends on whether or not you grow the tomatoes yourself. Price of having initially buying the jars, something to factor in, but once you buy the jars, then you certainly have the jars as long as you need them. I do regularly, friends bring over a box. They are no longer canning. So I've gotten bottles from various sources, thrift stores. I have bought a brand new box. And then over time, I do save my jars for if I ever purchase a pre-made spaghetti sauce. A lot of the commercial tomato sauce manufacturers do use a mason jar. So I wash them, clean them out, and then reuse them for my own processing. So lots of ways of getting jars. I haven't gone as far as to our neighbor and say, when you're done with your classico spaghetti sauce, I would love your jar. So there's lots of ways of being frugal. And like I said, the lids, they range in price from, I've seen them for $1, $2, ooh, another pop, at the store to Canadian Tire. I've seen them in most grocery stores during canning season. There's another one. So a lot of these things, like once the initial purchase has been made, it does pay for itself in the long run. So it's a matter of being ready and willing and able to capture the produce when it is in season and coming. We have a very short window for peaches in southwestern Ontario. Same with things like cherries, blueberries, any number of fruits. And then certainly making things like applesauce. There's a ton of recipes. So really whatever you're interested in. Chutney, they're delicious and fun. And like I said, making soups and stuff. So once people get their feet wet with water bath canning, they often will progress into a pressure canner, which is a whole other skill set and method of processing food. Some things can't be processed in a water bath and do need a pressure canner to make sure the internal temperature does get hot enough to kill any pathogen that could make us sick. So this is a great hobby. It is something that I would enjoy doing with a kitchen full of people and family to fill my pantry once the produce starts coming. So yeah, it's a wonderful, I don't have anything more to say other than jump in and start canning, making your own sauce, enjoying the fruits of your labor. So thank you for visiting today in the kitchen as we reviewed how to use a water bath and to use a library of things that will be available at the Reimagine Co here in London. It's one more step of reducing our footprint, how much we're making demands on the larger food system. And it allows us to be flexible and reactive to the foods around us more. So being able to process the foods that you're able to grow yourself and to visit a farm and a farmer's market so you can buy things at the peak of harvest and to process it for maximum nutrition. So thank you for joining me, and I hope I inspired you. I now have an additional 8 jars of spaghetti sauce. Thank you.